any second.
Nice cue. We're in. We're on.
Fantastic. So huge thanks to Patrick Haughey for doing this for Dungarvan Chamber members and also for our friends in Wexford. I'm thrilled to have Patrick. In Patrick's bio, it has that he has 20 years experience working in digital media and traditional media. And I think I know Patrick for going back 20 years. We both started in Beat together when it first came on air. He's now founder and director of Today FM School of Radio and Podcasting, and he delivers bespoke podcast training programs for massive organizations and for smaller businesses as well. Clients like EY, IBEC, DCU, the Public Relations Institute of Ireland. I know that we're going to gain huge insight today on how podcasting might work for our business and how to implement it as well. And so, Patrick, thank you very much. We'll hand over. And as I mentioned, this is a recorded session. So if you miss something, you can always hear it again later, and I'll obviously share it amongst colleagues too. Thanks, Patrick.
Thank you very much, Jenny, and hello, everybody. Lovely to see you. Jenny, it's nice to reminisce on those heady days of early days of Beat 102, 103. A lot of nights out, not so many anymore. But anyway, and before that, of course, let's call it my big break in radio. It all started with Des Whelan giving me taking a punt on a young 17-year-old and bringing him in on work experience to WLR. And it started with the late great Billy McCarthy. So that's what made me fall in love with audio, let's say. And it's not even like, this is kind of part of what we're talking about today. It's all audio now. It used to be like you'd have radio, you'd have video, all that kind of stuff. But now podcasting and radio, and even just the way companies are communicating through sound bites, audio has kind of become a sort of a very interesting medium in its own right. And, it now breaks down into the various things, whether it's radio or podcasting or whatever. So it's actually a really, really interesting time. But guys, look, a pleasure to be here and have your attention, hopefully, for the next little while. I'm basically, as Jenny mentioned, radio is my background. Produced radio for years and years and years. The kind of last big radio gig I had I was Matt Cooper, senior producer on Today FM for about 11 years. And a little bit after that was Mario Rosenstock's producer on the Mario Sunday Roast on Sundays. So you can imagine the difference in producing Mario and producing Matt. But anyway, it was variety is the spice of life. And I left Matt's show in 2017, and I actually left radio in 2017 to go work for a company called VoxPro, which you might be familiar with. It's that great Cork outsourcer, the Cork BPO set up down at Linda Kiley. And I went in as content editor, and I suppose it was just to develop my skills around digital and stuff like that, because 2017, obviously digital was very established, but still had a way to go in terms of, I certainly had a way to go in terms of learning all about the digital side of stuff, as along with the radio side of stuff. And I think I must have been, so I went in to look after the blogs and white papers and, all those kind of bits and bobs of the website. But I think I must have been missing the radio studio, because soon enough after I was in, I said, look, can we start a company podcast? So basically, we have all these interesting people on the floor here at VoxPro. You have all these amazing clients who you work with, all the kind of heads of operations and customer experience in companies like Google and Facebook and Nest and all these fascinating places. So we should actually just sort of get them into a studio and talk to them about what they do, talk to them about kind of, how they've become who they've become within the companies they've become. And I think there'd be a lot of interest from an audience by listening to those conversations, and particularly the kind of audience that VoxPro needed to be aware of VoxPro, the target audience, for example, the target customer. So we did that, and they gave me the go-ahead, and we started to see the benefits and, lots of different types of benefits pretty soon after. And I'll come back to that in a little while. But after about a year there, I said, look, if I can sort of set up something like this for VoxPro, surely there's other companies that could benefit from having a company podcast all of their own. And so just to define company podcasts, I guess, because that's what we're going to be talking about in the main, is that, a podcast, basically, if you're not into podcasting, a podcast in its very basic thing is like, if a piece of audio, a radio show for all the world, or a documentary or anything like that, that's just available on digital. okay, available on places like Apple and Spotify and things like that, as opposed to being available on an FM signal or whatever. A company podcast is basically, instead of WLR or Today FM making shows, a company makes them by themselves, set up a little in-house studio or anything like that, and talks about the stuff they want to talk about to reach the kind of people they want to reach. And so I said, look, I'll be able to sort of, offer a service to companies where if they want to start embracing audio as a way to reach the people they need to reach, clients, customers, stakeholders, I'll be able to sort of, work with them on that to create a show that not only reaches their business goals, but also is something that's enjoyable to listen to, because, it's very easy to make a podcast, but it's not easy to make a good podcast that will actually grow an audience. So that was the start of Audiobrand. And I've gone on, maybe it was about 3 years ago. So I've worked with companies like, I still do, like EY, IBEC, Irish Life, Lidl, SuperValue, Mario Rosenstock, not a company in his own right, but that'll be the sort of latest editorial podcast. And it's been a really, really interesting time. So what I wanted to talk about over the next few minutes is a couple of things. Why there's been such an explosion in podcasting, and maybe some of a snapshot of the figures around that. We all can heard the fact that podcasts are popular, but let's just look at 2 or 3 of the actual figures behind it to kind of illustrate that. We look at how companies and why companies are taking advantage of the growth in podcasting in order to grow their business, and the basics of how you can make one. So obviously there's lots, so we could spend hours on each individual one of those. So this will be a quick snapshot, but of course, I'll have my contact details on the end of these slides, and you're more than welcome to contact me if you want to pick into anything a bit more detailed or ask any questions about any of the elements ever since. And please do jump in. I'll leave a bit of time for questions at the end. But please don't hesitate to put up those little yellow Zoom hands, or just shout at me if you have a question at any stage, please. We'll keep it nice and free flowing. I came across a cartoon in the New Yorker not so long ago where a guy turns to a girl and he goes, I'm thinking of stopping a podcast, which I thought was a lovely, clever play on the fact that, every second person we seem to meet these days is kind of like saying, I'm thinking of starting a podcast. And it's got to the point now where it's become a thing of satire. But like with all great satire, there's a lot of truth in the fact that, it's got to that point. So I just wanted to give you a little snapshot of numbers just so you can kind of see what's behind it. So I'm going to look at Ireland specifically. Irish people listened to 20 million podcasts in the last quarter of last year, and that was up from 15 million in Q1. So there was a 33% increase in the amount of podcasts that we were listening to in the space of 1 year. It's an interesting one because it was a pandemic year. And, on one hand, you might expect a growth in podcasting because suddenly when we weren't able to be around people so much anymore, we weren't, there weren't our colleagues or friends around us in the same way. We maybe turned to our favorite podcast hosts, our Joe Rogans, our Tommy and Hectors, our two Johnnies, to keep us company, because podcasting is the most intimate medium. In my opinion, 90% of podcasting is done alone. It's not a communal experience. It's something that it's just us, the headphones, and our favorite podcast hosts. So I think they were company for a lot of people throughout the year. On the other hand, they're very tied into our daily routines. And when the pandemic hit, those daily routines basically stopped. So there was a little dip in the amount of podcasts being listened to at the start, but soon we found new routines and we started to crave company, and we found them in podcasts. So we can certainly see that continuing even as we go back to normal. A lot of the sort of signs are there. Irish people, as Jenny, you will attest to as well, have always loved radio. We've always loved audio, storytelling, the oral tradition. And that has translated very much into love of podcasts as well, because we actually listen to podcasts more podcasts than many of our EU neighbours. 40% of us are regular listeners to podcasts. That's versus 31% across the EU. So we do love audio, and so it's always nice to know that, because if you if you are thinking of launching a podcast, and particularly if you're thinking of launching a company podcast, there has to be a business case. You've got to know that you're sort of launching and you're investing in something that is going to be released into a fertile ground, let's say. So if you launch a podcast in Ireland, you are doing just that. You have a higher chance of finding an audience than you may do in some other EU countries or many other EU countries. In terms of the amount of podcasts being launched, so here's your competition. 885,000 podcasts were launched in last year, and that compared to 320,000 in the year before. So look at that spike in terms of the number of people. So all those people who came up to you and said, I'm thinking of starting a podcast, it seems like many of them did. So there's huge competition, and it's really important to note that. But at the same time, around 30% of all podcasts only have 1 or 2 episodes. And I think that's fascinating, because I mentioned earlier that it's easy to make a podcast, but it's not easy to make a good one. So I think an awful lot of people I'll go down to Harvey Norman, I'll buy a microphone, and sure, I'll just get my friends around the kitchen table and we'll chat because we're hilarious, and I'll launch it and we're going to find a big audience and have Coca-Cola sponsoring us within 3 weeks. But you soon find out that it's actually hard work. There's an awful lot of planning, production. Recording high quality audio is not easy. Editing those hilarious friends of yours from 6 hours down to 30 minutes is not easy. So soon it becomes hard work. And a lot of people do what we call pod fade. They kind of fade out after a couple of episodes because it's not fun anymore. So while there's a lot of competition, a lot of that's not real competition. So you can take sort of, a bit of comfort in that as well, that you're not up against as many podcasts as you think you are. Even if you just publish 3 episodes, you're already like, you're doing better than so many people. Money coming into the industry. Are advertisers interested in putting money into it? Are people willing to sponsor or podcasts? Very much so, and increasingly so as well. So in 2018, advertisers spent $480 million on podcasts. This year, they're projected to spend around 1.1 billion. And by 2025, it looks like more than 3 times that. So, and I would notice this very much on a sort of a first-hand basis as well. There is more money coming into the industry, which means better content, more professional people, and just the space itself, because you're going to have higher quality content, more people are going to come in and start enjoying podcasts, I think, because there's still plenty of people who don't listen to podcasts, and that's a huge opportunity. The market is not flooded. There's a huge runway, let's say, in terms of growth of audience still, which is really, really interesting. So I wanted to touch on what's driving this growth. Why has it exploded? And seemingly in such a short space of time as well. There's lots of different reasons, but I break it down into time, technology, and content. Okay. So video material, video content, and written content demand 100% of your attention. Okay. You have to stop what you're doing. Unless you're going to drive dangerously, or unless you're going to run the threat of falling off the treadmill, you pretty much have to concentrate 100% on video and on words. Okay, you can't really do anything else at the same time. That means that's why video content and written material is short. There's a sort of a short threshold there in terms of people's attention, because there's only so long we are willing to give 100% of our time to. Whereas with podcasts, it's almost the opposite. We tend to listen to podcasts, or most of us listen to podcasts while we're doing other stuff that we'd be doing anyway. Going to the gym, walking the dog, cooking the dinner, driving or cycling to work, whatever that might be, we listen to podcasts. They're the tasks we're doing anyway. And now we're just filling them with interesting content, educating ourselves, entertaining ourselves, whatever it might be. So it's a very time efficient way to educate, inform, or entertain yourself. And as a result, people are willing to give a lot longer to a podcast than they are to a video. That's not to say a podcast is better than a video. The two are run side by side. I actually think podcasting should not replace anything that you're currently doing. It just adds to it. And whereas you might hold someone's attention for 5 minutes in a very visual way in a video, you could hold their attention for half an hour with the podcast. So then you can share for longer. You can feature people's stories that are very hard to get in there in 5 minutes. And there's a lot of stuff you can do with more time. So you can take advantage of that in terms of the audio side of stuff. With technology, It used to be very difficult to listen to a podcast. I don't know. I'm old enough to remember when you'd have to, you'd have to first of all find someone who made podcasts. You'd have to kind of try and download it over a dial-up connection that might take you half an hour. Then you find this, you have to dust off, like go rooting through doors to find this thing called your MP3 player. Hopefully you can find the cable that connects into your computer, try and transfer it, and so on and so forth. And then the chances are it probably wasn't even worth it in the long run anyway. Whereas now it's literally the click of a button. Every single phone, whether it's an iPhone or an Android phone, comes with a native podcast app. One click, you're into a world of 2 million podcasts. One more click, you're now listening. So technology has made it very, very easy. And of course, we get into our cars and suddenly we're mirroring our phones, or we have our friend Alexa in the kitchen. Alexa, pop on my favorite podcast. All of this kind of stuff is really added to the growth. If you want to make someone do something, make it easy for them. And that's what's after happening. And then the final thing is the content. As we saw, there's so much more money so much more money flowing into the industry, and that means the industry can afford, experts, producers, great sound engineers, an investment in quality content. So, with every passing day, a better podcast has arrived on the scene that we start telling our friends about and we start telling our colleagues about. And that's how you really grow something. It's not always about marketing the hell out of it. It's actually about it being recommended to us and making something shareable. Have you heard the Super Value podcast with the Happy Pair lads? Yeah, no, it's really good. They had Joe Wicks on or whatever. You'd enjoy it because you're kind of, trying to get healthy at the moment or whatever that might be. So you want to create something shareable. Really, really, really important. I'm going to hand over the microphone to Anna Sale just for a minute and a half or so, who's got this very popular podcast called Death, Sex and Money. And, while we can look at the data and while we can look at the sort of the figures and the technology behind it, I came across this clip yesterday and she's talking about why she believes podcasting is growing. And I guess what's special about it as a medium. So I'll hand over to Anna for a moment.
The thing that's pretty special about podcasting is it's a kind of media that you can opt into when you need it and when you want it. And it has this feel of a community when you're pressing play, when you choose to listen to something. So I think that has this kind of magic along with it, that the interviews that I'm able to do, people are perhaps a little more open, a little more willing to be vulnerable than they would be if they were, in a TV studio or talking live on the radio. It just has that extra quality of intimacy that allows all of us to open up a little bit more.
You talked about the intimacy. We've always talked about radio is intimate, but you're saying that podcast is a little bit more intimate because like if we want to listen to Morning Edition, you either have to listen to it in the morning or catch it on the website at afternoon, right?
Yeah.
But You're saying that podcast now is like, it's right there. You want to listen to it. You kind of binge on it. The way we have Netflix nowadays and Amazon Prime and Hulu. We want to just keep going with this.
Theory is that because, it's an on-demand kind of listening that you're opting in, that then it's like, oh, I'm like joining my club. I'm coming and showing up and I'm going to listen to my podcast right now. And so the relationships that I have with podcast hosts, even if they don't know me at all, like I feel deeply connected to them, and I feel deeply connected also to my fellow listeners. Like that's been something that's very cool about making Death, Sex and Money. We continually just ask these really broad open questions of our audience, to ask them to share stories about everything from going through infidelity in relationships to how they're dealing with debt in their lives to how they're dealing with getting older. And people share, and then we share those stories back with our listeners. And so you begin to have this sense of like, oh, this is who else is listening. This is this community that I'm a part of. And it just creates a real sense of gathering and belonging, even though you're listening by yourself, which I have really appreciated, especially in these last.
Sorry, I cut off there, but in the last few months, I think she's talking about that sense of, like I mentioned earlier, that sense of community and togetherness that even though you're by yourself, you're feeling like you're part of a community. And that's been particularly much a feature of the growth over the last year, I think, as well. But also that on-demand nature, there's once people get a taste of listening to exactly what they want to listen to, when they want to listen to it, there's no going back from that. There's no time where we're going to suddenly not want Netflix on our telly because we want to go back to RT dictating what we watch and when. That both have a place, of course, same as radio and podcasting, but each medium has its own unique offering, if that makes sense. So that's I think just my kind of very initial thoughts on why we've seen such an explosion. And now I just want to touch on, I guess, how companies are taking advantage of the fact that there's this kind of shiny new medium that's exploding in popularity, and that's very doable from a sort of an in-house perspective. I think what's exciting is there used to be, if you wanted to create an audio show, a radio show of your own, for example, and build an audience for it, you used to have a license from the Broadcasting Authority of Ireland and, a transmitter and a team of people. Whereas now you literally, like I mentioned, you pop down to Harvey Norman, you buy a few bits, you put a few cushions around the mic in your bedroom. And if you're saying the right stuff and talking to the right people, and you have an internet connection, you can build up an audience and reach an audience of people far greater than half the local radio stations in the country and beyond. It's just a fascinating time right now. And companies are taking advantage of this. And we're seeing all sorts of companies sort of come into it. We got, Ryanair, Jameson with the story of Irish whiskey. Aldi have recently released their own one with Abu Huberman, very much about trying to promote their baby products. And Amy is talking about her being a mother and her experiences with that. Sephora, the makeup, have lip stories. There are countless numbers, even though it's still quite early in the sort of the branded podcast space. We're seeing some really, really interesting examples coming out. But, even though that's happening, I'm always asked the question, why would anyone listen to a podcast made by a supermarket? Why would anyone listen to a podcast made by an accountancy firm? Do you know what I mean? Like, there's still that kind of head scratch bit there as well. And again, I think I'm as someone who can explain it far better than I can is this guy here who's called Steve Pratt. And he runs one of the biggest branded podcast agencies in North America. They make podcasts, original podcasts for some, for Google and McAfee and Dell and some of the huge technology companies and beyond. And I interviewed him recently and I asked him that question. I said, why would, when it comes down to it, why would anyone listen to a branded podcast? So he had a minute or so to say on this.
I think that companies have a lot of unique knowledge to be able to offer to listeners. And there's a big strategic starting point, I think, where a company has to think about why they want to make a podcast and what their business goals would be in making a podcast. And on the flip side, to balance that with what are the things that we can share that people actually want to hear, and to put the listener first when they're thinking about that show. So what's the show that only we could make that our potential listeners would love to hear about? We often think about this as like giving a gift to the audience. And what's the gift of things that you know that your customers would be better off if they knew? Or what are the stories that you could tell that would entertain them and inform them or help them improve their lives in some way? Everybody comes at it for a different reason, but it should ultimately, it should always be around creating value for the audience, because you have to earn their time and attention by making something great.
And that really is the nub of it. It's an audience first thing, and when it comes to business and when it comes to company podcasts, it's a simple formula of thinking, what do you do every day? What is the product you're an expert in? What is the service that you're an expert in delivering? And how can I actually bring that expertise to a wider audience in such a way that gives them value, that makes their day better, that helps them save money, that helps them, be clever about negotiation, about buying a property, that helps them get healthier. There's reasons that you guys are in the positions you're in, and podcasting is really just a way of actually sharing that expertise with people who would benefit from it. And you're giving it to them for free. And as a result, they are going to love you for it. and you are going to be the sort of the company of choice oftentimes in the position where there may be a lot of competition in your market or whatever, and it'd be quite an innovative thing to do. But I'm going to touch on that more in a few minutes' time. So it's to ask that question, what's the podcast that only you can make? What are your unique story and your unique expertise, and how can you give value to an audience? And I always sum it up in a kind of a very basic Venn diagram, that there's what you want to say, okay, and this, what you want to achieve from this, but then there's what an audience wants to hear, okay? And a successful branded podcast is the bit in the middle. Often you might get skewed to one or the other. That we basically have companies creating podcasts that are just like infomercials. It's like John from Vodafone and Mary from Vodafone talking about how great Vodafone is and what wonderful offers they have. There's not so much value to an audience in that, you can possibly skew a bit too light touch and give, and not have enough of your company within a podcast, but you rarely hear that. Light touch is generally a good option, or the way to go. And an example I wanted to play, one I worked on when I produced for SuperValue late last year, just to sort of give you a very brief case study on kind of how something like this comes about. So we have SuperValue, Musgrave Group, SuperValue, who have a commercial partnership with the Happy Pair, okay? And SuperValue basically want to become the supermarket, the retailer that people associate with healthy living, of healthy eating, okay? They want people to stop walking past the healthy food aisle and just looking at sort of bags of strange looking legumes and keeping walking on. They want to change that to the point where people will stop and they go, oh yeah, I'm going to buy a bag of those lentils, or buy a bag of the quinoa or whatever, and do something with it because I'm kind of a bit more empowered and more informed. And over time, SuperValue becomes the go-to place for healthy eating. Okay, it's that brand alignment thing, and it separates them from their competitors. So they also have a distinct asset within their reach, and that's a commercial partnership with Dave and Steve Flynn, the Happy Pair, who are kind of well known for healthy eating. So they said, let's create a podcast series that uses the two lads to front up. We're going to give people advice when I meet celebrities, meet experts about how to live healthier lives. And we are going to, and through that, people will, learn about how to live healthier lives. They might buy healthier products from SuperValue, and over time, we become associated with healthy living. That's the purpose and that's the goal. So what we did was create the Happy Pair podcast, and I have a short trailer which might illustrate how we kind of tried to go about it. And I think when you're listening to the trailer, listen carefully about the value, okay? What we're trying to tell the audience, this is the value you will get in return for your time. And that's the important thing, okay? So if you ever kind of, set out to make a company podcast, keep that audience first thing in the top of your mind, and always, what value am I giving to the people who are giving me their time to listen to this podcast? So here's a little taste.
Hi, I'm Dave.
And I'm Steve.
And this is a little trailer for the Happy Pair podcast. This podcast is made in partnership with SuperValue, and we'll be having chats with some amazing guests throughout the series, each of them bringing a completely different way of looking at how to get healthy and live your best life. People like Joe Wicks, the body coach.
What made me do PE with Joe for 18 weeks of a broken hand? What made me get up every day at 9 a.m? It was the fact that I knew I was helping people. So for me, success is when you're helping others, when you're truly like benefiting and impacting other people's lives, is where we really find our happiness, because we are essentially connected.
Dr. Megan Rossi, the gut health doctor.
If you don't have good gut health, if your gut lining is not strong, then no matter how healthy the food you put into your body is, you're not going to be able to digest it and extract it. So if you want to get the most out of your food, you need to have good gut health.
Jerry Hussey, performance psychologist and modern day sage.
Yes, you might want to lose weight. Yes, we might want to put on more muscle. Yes, we might want to change jobs. That's fine. But right now you are enough. Right now you have enough. And the moment you start to look in the mirror and start to feel inspired by the person you see is the moment you take your own power back.
There'll be loads more stars in the world of health and well-being sharing their stories and knowledge. So if you want to learn more about eating better food, making better choices, moving your body the way it should be moved, and becoming a stronger, confident, more powerful person, then come on in and have a listen. You could subscribe or follow the series wherever you're listening to this right now. And of course, we spend a little bit of time on social media, so be sure to hit us up there and let us know what you think. Tell us who you'd like us to chat with on the series, and most importantly, to share your stories with us. Thanks again, Dave and Steve here, over and out.
So that's the Happy Pair podcast, but I would see that as a template for so many other things that could fit into that. So, you know, for example, you know, Regina, from the business you're in, you know, buying houses is hard. Buying properties is difficult. It's a tough journey. We're here to sort of share our expertise, meet some people who are experts in their field around helping you to negotiate, helping you to find that right house, helping you to be empowered to make the right decision. Do you know what I mean? Or Pete, getting healthy is hard. You know, it's sort of similar to this one. Getting healthy is hard. And we are here to help you to, you know, to keep you company on that journey. To give you tips, to partner you up with people who are going to be your buddies around this and all that kind of stuff. So you could nearly see almost see it as a template of, you know, what are the problems of the people that are my customers or my clients or my stakeholders, and how can I help solve those problems? Okay, it's quite simple. But it's difficult to do well, and that's why so many people drop out after the 1 or 2 episodes. But if you're committed to it and you plan it properly, it can be an extremely powerful way to grow your business, but become known for something and become, you know, far ahead of your competitors in terms of what you're doing, or make the people who are giving you your funding or paying membership fees, giving them value, and more value than they're expecting nearly in so many cases. So it can be really, really powerful from that perspective. And, you know, just back to applying that Venn diagram back on what we just heard, you know, what SuperValu want to say is we are the go-to place for healthy food choices and healthy living. What an audience wants to hear are 2, you know, presenters with a great profile. And they want to hear people like Russell Brand and Joe Wicks and Megan Rossi talking about things that empower them to make healthier decisions. So, you know, the bit in the middle, Successful Branded Podcast. Any questions so far? I'm going to jump into sort of some of the basic steps of how you might go about starting your own podcast, should you be so inclined. But if you have any questions on what we've talked about so far, please shout at me. Okay, good. I'll plow on, and we'll have a little bit of time towards the end if you have any questions based on this, because here's the science bit. We'll get into the practical stuff now as well. And again, I'm just going to touch on a few things just so you come off this call with maybe just a list of some things that you might need to sort of have together or invest in if you decide to make your own company podcast. So as I mentioned earlier, a lot of people, okay, so first of all, a lot of people think that recording the audio is the hard bit. Okay, actually, you know, the equipment, Jesus, what kind of equipment do I need? How do I edit it? Like, where do you get the music and the sound effects and, you know, find the guests and everything? But I can promise you now, that's the bit you should spend the least time on. And the bit you should spend the most time on is actually creating the concept, creating the actual whole thrust of the series. What are you trying to achieve? Who do you want to reach, and how are you going to reach them? What kind of people are we going to talk to? What kind of things are we going to discuss? That can be the bit that needs the most time. Because, you know, there's no point in having the best recording equipment if what you're recording is actually not that great in terms of content. You also need to spend an awful lot of time marketing it, but that's a whole other call that we might come to in part 2, Jenny, at another stage if you want, because there's so much in that. And one of the big lessons, it was really tough actually, because I'd come from a radio background where you put 100% of your time into creating a great show. And then, like, it's all looked after. You do your show and you go back to kind of creating your own thing, because you have people responsible for marketing it. You have a loyal audience already here listening to your station. And I remember in Voxpro, I made 3 episodes, and come launch day, it dawned on me like that basically these wonderful 3 episodes of our new podcast that I've spent so much time and effort on are simply like MP3 files sitting on my desktop that nobody knows about. And then the point is like, okay, now I have to start all over again and actually try and build an audience. So we might come back to that at another stage, but there's plenty of tips and tricks about trying to make that time efficient, which we can cover at another stage. Okay, so in terms of what are you actually going to create? Start by asking yourself 3 simple questions. Okay, number 1, is who is our target audience? Who needs to hear this podcast? So is it customers of my shop or of my consultancy? Is it clients? You know, if I'm in a accountancy firm or an architect firm, it might be my clients. If I'm a Dungarvan West Waterford Chamber, it might be my members. If I'm receiving government funding or state funding, it might be the stakeholders. You know, it might be the people, not only the people who are going to use my service, but I also need, you know, people who are funding my organization to understand that how I'm using their funds and putting it to good use. So everyone's got a different answer for that. There's some of the examples. Number 2, what would be of value to this audience? Okay, is it information on your product or service? If you have if you run a jewelers, do people always have those same questions about how to buy a good diamond, for an engagement ring or whatever? If you're a butcher, are there people asking the same 10 questions about cuts of meat during barbecue season or whatever? It can be anything. So will you provide, giving them that information in a podcast, is that going to be the value? Is it your expertise around negotiation, your expertise around, developing networks or whatever it might be? Things that help them do better business or to save money or whatever it might be. And number 3, what can we do to give them this value? We can share our expertise. Will it be me talking? Will it just be, me as the expert in this company talking for 10, 15 minutes about some of the common questions, answering some of the common questions I get? Is it going to be, do I have really interesting clients, people who are already, part of my organization, and I can talk to them and interview them about their field, because other people, my target market is other people like them, and other people like them would like to hear other people like them, if that makes sense, that you might have access to. So also always think about what assets you already have to hand: expertise, customers, clients, members, stakeholders, whatever it might be, and use that a lot of the time. So those 3 questions, by answering those 3 questions, you will certainly have a great foundation in terms of creating something that informs and engages people or entertains them. And you kind of, I would always suggest that you answer the questions, print it off and stick it up on your wall, okay? Because this is your guiding light throughout the series. Because what I found is sometimes you can get to episode 7 or episode 17 and you're in the middle of an interview, you're going, oh, Jesus, what are we doing here? Like, I'm talking to this person, but I kind of forgotten our purpose and our overarching goal. And it's important to remind yourself of that. And sometimes the time you will work it out the best is this time when you're at planning stage. So print it off and stick it on a wall and come back to it each time, so you stay on target, because you need to have a purpose and a consistency of purpose to have a successful podcast. Because people kind of hear when you're meandering a little bit and you start to lose your sort of focus. Once you have your concept, now you have to think about, well, what's going to be the vehicle? Okay, what kind of series am I going to create? And time and budget are very, very important considerations when it comes to this, okay? Because some formats are a lot more achievable than others. So the first one, and this would be quite one of the most common ones, is an interview series, okay, where you interview members of your team, or you interview some clients, or you interview experts in the same kind of field as you're in. In the case of the EY podcast, this would be in that format. So what EY is trying to do is basically connect with more CEOs, people at C-level. And what they're doing is, or CFOs as well, chief financial officers. And so what they did was, we just have a simple series where we get Richard Curran to interview CEOs and Vincent Wall to interview CFOs about what they do and how they got to where they're at, and their thoughts on being a CEO or a CFO. And that's going to attract that kind of right audience. Okay. I don't know if I have time to play the clips. I won't. I might just leave off the clips at the moment because I wanted to make sure we have time for questions. It's a simple format. It allows the guest to shine. You're basically heroing a guest and giving them the full platform. But there is a lot of competition. There's a lot of interview series out there, and trying to kind of convince somebody that they should listen to yours over somebody else's can be tough. So you got to be a really good interviewer, or you got to bring in a really good interviewer, ask the right questions, and become known for something. Okay, that's really important. You can go down the panel route where it's you or presenter plus 2 or 3 people. Okay. It can be good from a strategic perspective. In terms of, you might have, so Jenny, for example, you may not just want to speak to one member each time. You might decide that you will have a template of, we have somebody in a member who is in the services industry, a member who is an entrepreneur, and then maybe an expert, an academic on business or something like that. And you can kind of develop a template where you hit a number of markers, tick a number of boxes all in one go, okay, with a panel scenario. You do need a kind of a different recording setup for that. And I'll touch briefly on the equipment in a moment. It's not now just like one microphone and maybe somebody on Zoom. Now you've got a little bit more intricate when you're trying to capture more voices. And obviously the editing is a little bit more detailed as well. And then the third one is sort of that narrative documentary driven, where basically it's almost like a documentary. You've recorded loads of different voices and you spend time with an editor or something kind of creating this beautiful soundscape and tapestry stuff. Not done very often because it's very expensive and very time consuming. So I think it's probably the one to aim for, aspire to, as opposed to the one to start with, unless you've managed to carve out a shed load of budget and time to actually create the thing. So, just some things to think about. Once you have your concept, now, are you going to do an interview show? Are you going to have panels? Are you going to do something a little bit more elaborate in terms of telling stories on air or whatever that might be? The recording equipment and the editing equipment. What do you need? What are your options? Okay, you have a range of options. First of all, you can just forget about all your equipment and just hire a professional recording studio where you show up and your guest shows up and everything is looked after for you. You're, shepherded into a room with microphones, and you will have a sound engineer there, and all you have to do is talk. And that can be a really, really attractive, certainly at the start of the whole process. If you don't want to be bogged down with the technical, let's just outsource that bit and let me concentrate on my questions and getting this right. So it can be a nice way to start it. And then when you're comfortable, you're comfortable that maybe we could kind of upgrade to something, or well, it's not upgrade, but maybe if I could bring something in-house, maybe you might decide that you might, because studios can range from anything from 80 quid an hour to 300 or 500 quid an hour, very much depending on the studio. I'm not sure about, so they'd be kind of, my experience from Dublin studios. So I might just check out what the options are in Waterford as well. Maybe WLR would, and particularly the studio in Dungarvan, they might be open to, hiring it out for an hour or whatever like that. And there might be other studios. So I'm going to do a little bit of digging around on that, or maybe you're familiar with it yourself. But that's your kind of first option.
Patrick, can I just come in here?
Yes.
Boxworks here in Waterford have a podcast studio and they charge €20 an hour.
Oh, that's brilliant. Oh, that's brilliant. Fantastic. Would that be with...
It really is only suitable for one person. If you put two in it, it's a bit small. But for you to sit there and interview someone else who's somewhere else, it's certainly feasible, because I've checked that out myself.
Very good. Okay, well, 20 quid an hour is absolutely fantastic. And that's great. But like you say, very much a remote scenario where you dial someone up on Zoom or whatever, and you just want to have a mic in front of you. And okay, that's brilliant. Is that Flash Gordon's place? Is it? Or... Yeah, brilliant. Okay, very good. If anyone else has any knowledge of any other studios, pop them into the chat or in an email after. I think it'd be really useful to get a list together. And I will certainly share once I find to get any more information of ones that are around. If you do decide that, okay, I don't want to travel to that place every time I do an interview. I want to be a bit more mobile. I want to do it from my office. The actual setup around equipment has become very high quality and very cost efficient in recent years. So if you want to get your own microphone or microphones, you have a range of options again. Okay. So the first one would be like a handheld digital recorder. So, basically like a really fancy dictaphone that's going to pick up professional grade audio, but allows you to travel to someone's house and record it, or travel to someone's business, or maybe go out onto the street and talk to people about their experiences of, doing business or XYZ, or buying houses, or doing sport, whatever it might be. Ones that I would, Zoom is a fantastic brand of recorder. The entry level one is a Zoom H1N, which is, do I have one actually? I think I have one here. So it's about, I think you get one for about 80 or 90 euro. Very, very good quality. It doubles up as a microphone if you plug it into your laptop. So it's just something really simple like that. Nice little microphones on the top. And to record, you simply press the red button and you're recording. To stop, you simply press the red button again, and now you have a track. Okay, it takes a little bit of technique in order to hold it right. It can be quite sensitive around the, about picking up handling sounds. If you're too close to the person's mouth and the levels are too high, it's going to sound too loud and the audio will be all distorted. But with a bit of practice, everything is completely achievable when it comes to equipment. And then that range goes up to like the Zoom H5 or 6, where it's a bit more high quality, bigger memory, nicer interface, but also allows you to plug extra mics into it. So this thing is perfect when you're doing one-to-one interviews. But if you want to interview a panel of 3 people, your arm would be killing you after an hour because you're just sort of going around and it's going to be a little messy. So you might want to have 2 or 3 microphones that all plug into the one thing. And the Zoom H5 or 6 will allow you to do that. Again, toy around with it for a little bit. But it's worth checking out that as a brand. If, as you mentioned, Mary, if you're just doing, say, one-to-one interviews and they tend to be remote, so if you want to catch up with customers or clients or experts and they're somewhere else and you want to do it over Zoom, I always warn against relying on your laptop microphone to actually do the interviews, because they are so hit and miss in terms of quality. And always when you can, use an external microphone if you're going to be the host. So here's USB mics are the ones to go for in this scenario when it's just going to be you and remote guests. So that, for example, that is a USB. That's a really good quality microphone. They're called the Rode NT, about 150 quid, and it plugs straight into your laptop and overrides your internal microphone. So now basically you're now sounding, a lot more professional as a presenter, as you will if you're relying on your internal microphone that comes with the laptop. But you can pay anything for them, but I would recommend somewhere between 100 and 200 euro will get you something really, really good. And then your sort of most elaborate setup, but you will get better sound, is XLR microphones. So basically they're the ones, the traditional ones you'll see at gigs where it's just this big clunky thing on the end of a cable that jams into a box called an audio interface. They would be, and actually I'll show you, I'll jump onto the next slide for a second. That's what I would have used to record the Happy Pair podcast. So what you see here on the left is Dave and Steve Flynn, and these microphones it's like the one I have in the background there. It's a Shure SM7B. They're about 350 euro. Beautiful sound, like really, really rich, warm sound. And one end of the cable plugs into them and the other end plugs into that little red box there. That's just simply called an audio interface. And all that does is basically allows you to plug a couple of those mics. So you see on port 1 and port 2, I've got the 2 presenters, and then Jerry Hussey there on the right, his microphone plugs into the third little port there. And I just have a little lead coming out of the back of that goes straight into my laptop, and I record the voices directly into my editing software. So I don't want to get too technical or anything, but basically it's a really nice portable setup with very high quality sound. Okay. So that would be your audio interface setup. So I'm going to just jump back here and share again. That would probably, sorry, I just want to stop sharing for a second. So that whole setup would probably cost me, like the mics are about 350 each and the audio interface is about 400, but you can get them, much cheaper than that as well. Like it just depends on your preference. But for for the guts of 800 quid, you could have a perfectly good setup in your office to be able to record panels and stuff like that in really high quality format. So they're the different ways you can kind of capture audio. Editing, and I'm not going to go into editing now at all, but if you are so inclined, if you would like to mess around with some editing software and kind of see what it actually involves, there's a free one called Audacity, which basically you can just download for free. It's open source, and it allows you to, you know, if you have three different voices, you put them all together and you edit them and you mix it down to your episode, and you can add music and stuff like that. But again, that could be a separate webinar if you're so inclined. Happy to give you a bit of guidance on that. But I'm all about sort of, you know, not investing in stuff until such point you need to. Okay, don't go out and buy the best equipment. Don't spend money on editing software. The cheap to free stuff can do you so well until such point that you want to upgrade. So in terms of cost efficiency, podcasting is a very cost efficient way to sort of gather your content, and it's a very cost efficient thing to do. And then when it comes to actually, you know, you've captured everything. It's now your episode is sitting on your desktop. How do I get it to Apple? How do I get it to Spotify and all these places? Absolutely simple out. There's this stuff called publishing software. They're called media hosts. Okay. And essentially there's just websites that say, you upload your audio, you upload your episode to us, write in your title, write in your description, press go, and we will send it out everywhere you need it to be sent out to. Not only that, but we will actually figure out how many people are listening in Spotify and where they are. We'll figure out who's listening on Apple, and we'll give you a little metrics report whenever you want it to let you know how you're performing in terms of listenership, location, age group at times, that kind of stuff. Two that are worth trying. Buzzsprout is one that I would use a lot of the time, Buzzsprout, and Anchor is another one as well. So just if you're so inclined, it's worth checking those out. But basically, if you've got any version of those 4 things, then you're in a position to publish a podcast. Okay. The important thing is that you have something good to publish that's going to be of value to your audience. Okay. And as well, what I would say is if you're doing it in-house, in an office or something like that, be sure that it's what I would call acoustically treated. Okay. Put foam paneling around the room. You know, the way sometimes we hear interviews that it just sounds like somebody is in the Dunmore caves. It's just echoes and, you know, reverb and everything like that. The simplest way I put it is that your voice is like a tennis ball. Okay. And if I'm to face like a glass panel wall in a boardroom or something like that and throw a tennis ball at it, what's going to happen? It's going to bounce straight back at me. And that's the sound of an echo. Your voice will do the same thing. It'll hit off a hard surface wall and it'll bounce back into the microphone, and it won't sound that great. But if I put a piece of foam, or if I close the curtains and I throw a tennis ball at it, what happens? It just thuds, hits the ground. Same thing will happen to your voice. So make sure that you try and surround yourself with, you know, absorbent materials like curtains, carpet, bits of foam, anything like that. Generally, the least glamorous looking setup is the one that achieves the best audio. Okay, so you can see it like that. So unless you're videoing it, then forget about the glamour and just go for what is going to sound best. Okay, and it can be very simple. It can be pillows and duvets and mattresses, and a lot of your top podcasts in the world that's what they're actually doing. Okay, so listen, I'm about to wrap up. I know time is against us, but I'm going to send these slides on after. But I've kind of talked about the return on investment. You know, it's not just about listens, it's about building your brand. You know, there's millions of people spending time on Spotify and Apple every day. This is a chance for you to reach them, and they may not be able to, you know, if you're not on those platforms, if you're not reaching them that way, then they may never come across you. But it helps you build relationships with your clients, with your customers, be it current or future. If you can give the job and build a team within your organization to look after the podcast, and I guarantee you they will enjoy it. It's a lovely creative process. So you kind of got the employee engagement side and differentiate. You know, if there's 5 competitors in your space and you're the only one with a podcast and a good podcast, then you are going to look more innovative. You're going to maybe reach different people than they are, and maybe more people than they are. So there's a few different reasons why you might want to do it. And then also content for marketing. So I'm going to end on that. Just 5 basic things. Spend as much time planning the series as you spend making it. Keep the branding light touch. Okay. Always put the listener first, respect their time and give them value. Invest in quality audio branding and presentation, and also publish regularly. Don't set out to do a weekly podcast and it turns out to be, sometimes it's once a month, sometimes it's once a week, sometimes it's once every 6 months. Whatever you set out, do it regularly, and that becomes part of the planning. Before you ever launch, figure out how achievable and sustainable the series is. Work out whether you can give it the time to actually sort of, put it out every week or every month or whatever it might be, and stick with that. And that's it. I'm totally gone over time, Jenny. Apologies. And if anyone needs to jump off, please do. But once I get started talking about this stuff, I can't stop. So anyway, that's the hazard. If you have any questions, please shout them at me now. But I do have a comment in from, is it Debbie? We have recently acquired podcasting equipment in Waterford Central Library and Dungarvan Library. That's fantastic. Is that for general hire, Debbie? I don't know if you're there or if you can talk, but
Hi, Patrick. Yeah, we're still figuring out how we're going to use the equipment. So yeah, if you're interested in taking a look at our equipment, do get in touch with us. I'm based in Dungarvan Library, or Sinead O'Higgins is based in Central Library in Waterford City.
Fantastic. That's great to know. Sophia, congratulations. So that's Boxworks and the libraries. There's 2 already, and we'll try and put together a list of more. Guys, does anyone have any questions before we wrap up? My email address is going to be, sorry, Niall, is it?
Yeah.
Hey, Niall, how are you? Sorry, I didn't see the little hand.
No, I was only trying this stuff out here. So
yeah.
And fantastic presentation. I mean, an absolute masterclass. So well done.
Oh, geez, thank you very much.
Yeah, no.
Thanks, Niall. You're obviously a podcast fan.
No. And that's where my question is going to come from. Very interested in the podcast, all that kind of stuff that's happening. I'm never going to get time to write a podcast, that's for sure. Just too busy in work. Where would one go about, or what kind of statistics are out there for sponsoring podcasts? So,
yeah.
Where would be a good source for me to say, oh, there's my target market over there, and maybe I'll throw money at that? Or
good idea.
That are out there.
Very good question. So you're basically saying, so I'm not going to make one, but I want to kind of get my message out to the people who are enjoying podcasts, whatever. So one of the big routes at the moment, so there's kind of 2 ways. So number one, you have to work out where your target audience is and what they're listening to. So for example, can I ask you, what's your business now, or what field are you in?
We do web development, app development, logo design, and animation.
Okay. So what I would say is it's the general route here is think about where the kind of audience who you feel would be interested in buying your services, for example, and what they're listening to currently. So maybe you deal mainly with entrepreneurs. So maybe they're listening, let's just say for the sake of this, that you want to reach small business people. So let's think, who are small business reaching, listening to, maybe they're listening to the David McWilliams podcast, trying to figure out stuff around economics and, bite-sized economics bits. So that's where your audience is. David McWilliams is part of the Acast network. Okay. So Acast is basically, it's a network of podcasts. Blind Boy, Tommy and Hector, Mario Rosenstock, a lot of the big Irish podcasts are part of the Acast family. So what Acast do is they partner up with you, and they'll say, so Dave McWilliams, we're going to try and find a sponsor or an advertiser around your podcast. So you can contact Acast and say, I want to take out an ad just before the David McWilliams podcast, or I want to spend a bit more and have David McWilliams talk about my company. So it works in the exact same way as radio now, as if you were to buy an ad or a host-read sponsorship on WLR or on Beat. You can do that on Acast on podcasts, as long as they're part of that. But the other option is that you could just independently sponsor. So if there's one podcast or 2 podcasts that you think are my market and they're not on Acast, just approach them. And this is the way, you approach them and go, figure out your budget and create and develop a partnership with them, so that at the start of each podcast, they talk about your company and how you developed fantastic logo design and website development for them, and you'd recommend them to anyone. They're the two main routes, and it is a growing market as well. It's definitely something you will get good value right now, but maybe not so much in a year or 2, because the rates will go up.
Damn it.
Get in there now. No, you're grand. It's still time. There's still time.
No, that was excellent. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Very welcome. Anyone else before we wrap, guys, or feel free to email me. I'll send around the slides to you, Jenny, and if you wanted to share them, and my email address is on the the back anyway. So if there's anything else you want to pick into, please do. But I'm guessing for now there's sandwiches to eat before the 2:00 gong.
Exactly.
Say we're all trying to process all of that as well, Patrick. It was absolutely fantastic. So much there that I think we're all probably gone in directions of great ideas for our businesses or organizations, and we just need to do that over the sandwich. Patrick, I hope we have you back again. I'd love to, and I'm sure the participants here would love to, and anybody who's missed it as well, because it's certainly a growing area, and I'm thrilled that you were able to afford us the time today and share
Pleasure.
such wonderful knowledge. Thank you so much.
Anytime. Thanks a million, Jenny.
Thank you.
Thanks a million, Patrick.
Thank you. Bye-bye.